I'm always looking for spectacular plants for my shade garden, but my space is becoming more limited, so I've come down to the UT Gardens in Jackson. In just a minute, we'll meet up with Jason Reeves, who's going to show us some spectacular plants like this gold-leafed Forsythia. Well, Jason, thanks for being with us this morning, and the first thing I want to talk about are these hydrangeas, which are really heavily budded up. Tell me a little bit about these.
This is Endless Summer, the original, and all the Endless Summer, including other Raymond cultivars such as Dooley and Penny Mac, will flower on new growth, but they really need to be fed after they froze back to the ground, and so that's what I've done to this one.
Okay, so these were frozen this winter. We've had a really cold winter, so this died all the way back to the ground?
Absolutely, down to the ground, and we cut it all back, and then I came in shortly after with just some general purpose triple 15 fertilized and sprinkled around it, and you see the end result.
Well, one of the things you guys have a number of here in the gardens are some of these new varieties of Heuchera. And I know every year there are more and more Heuchera that are added to the market, but what are some of the ones that you have had good luck with here?
This is Princess Silver, and we've had it in the garden for about 3 years now. And when you say new, I kind of lump things in the last 4, 5, 6 years.
Right.
But, you know, we've had to have it in the garden for a couple of years for me to actually be able to recommend it, and this Princess Silver is certainly showing out.
Well, and that's exactly the kind of thing, you know, I'm looking for too. To come to the UT Garden here at Jackson or any of the other locations, it's an opportunity for me and everybody to see plants that have been growing in the ground for 3 or 4 years and know how some of these newer varieties are going to perform in the garden before we plant them ourselves.
Absolutely, you know? That's what we're here for.
As I said, my space is kind of limited in my own garden, so I don't want to plant a whole bunch of things that I don't know are going to thrive. So you also have a really interesting fern down here by your feet, and it's one that I don't see very often.
Yeah, I don't see the Japanese beach fern offered for sale, but it's worth seeking out. Very drought tolerant once established in the shade garden, and I love the different contrast in the texture and the foliage, and you know the tips on it are sort of lighter green where it's darker down in.
Right, so it's a great texture in the garden and a little color variation, even though it's a variation on green.
Absolutely.
I think many times we forget that green is a color too, and there's always something interesting that you can do with textures and things. One other group of plants that I'm really fascinated by are these Pulminarias that have the funny spotted and variegated leaves. I just think they're so interesting in the shade garden, even when they're not in bloom. But do you have any tips or tricks for which Pulminarias do well here in the South?
Well, there's definitely some that do better than others, and those that have the species longnopholia, meaning long, slender leaf, are much better suited for our heat and humidity of the South. And there's cultivars like Diana, Clare, and Trevi Fountain that do really well. So seek those out with that species or hybrids of that species.
Of longnopholia.
Correct.
They're more tolerant of our humidity. I notice in my garden that they don't get the powdery mildew that some of the other varieties
That's right. You know, longnopholia is, again, a great shade perennial that blooms early in the spring. So what you're looking at now is already finished flowering.
Right.
But even after those flowers are gone, you've got that beautiful foliage throughout the summertime.
Yeah, so the flowers come up early and they're almost, for lack of a better comparison, almost like a little Virginia bluebell or something like that, in shades of kind of pink and purple, and then this beautiful foliage comes on after that.
Absolutely. You know, I often see bees frequented it, which, you know,
yeah,
in
really
March,
early,
there's not a lot out there
for the bees in March and early April, so that's a great thing to have in the garden.
It will also spread slowly and will seed around in the garden as well, which is, of course, an added attribute to the plant.
You know, one thing I like about the new Heucheras or coral bells is that we've got this beautiful colored foliage in a lot of the new ones. Which ones have you had great luck with here?
Well, you're looking at solar power, and I really like it for that gold foliage with a little bit of kind of burgundy stripe that it has to it. With a lot of them, I think they appreciate just a little bit of morning sun, and this gets just a bit here but keeps it colorful. We're going to look at Delta Dawn in a few minutes, which is also a really nice one. So that bright foliage, yellow with a little bit of burgundy or red, kind of adds a nice contrast to the foliage.
Yeah, and especially in the shade garden where flowers aren't always a prominent thing, it's nice to have, you know, with our hostas and our heucheras and other plants, to get some color into the shade garden by using colored foliage.
Absolutely. You know, most of our shade-loving plants or perennials are spring blooming, and once they're finished, you really want to concentrate on that beautiful foliage it has throughout the summer.
You've also trialed a number of hostas down here, and this one obviously has done very well. Cathedral windows?
That's right. Yeah, it's done really well for us and multiplied fairly rapidly for a large leaf hosta.
Right, and these Cathedral windows came out of a plant a few years ago called guacamole. And guacamole is a great plant for the South, and almost everything that's come out of it, fried green tomatoes and fried bananas, and this one, Cathedral windows. And the thing that I've loved about it in my own garden is that it does bulk up really quickly, where a lot of those big hostas are slow. So.
Yeah, this would be its third spring, and from a 1 gallon pot, they probably just had 2 or 3 plants in it, so
right.
It has grown rather fast.
So, and this is almost a, 3 foot to maybe almost 4 foot wide clump now, just in a few seasons time. So, where sometimes those old-fashioned blue hostas, those big ones, can take 5 or 6 years sometimes here in the South to really bulk up and get big. These do it in a hurry and give you some real presence in the shade garden. All right, I've known you long enough and been on enough shopping trips with you to know that you love this plant. So tell us about this.
I do. This is Edgeworthia, also known as paperbush, and yeah, I'm trying to collect all the different cultivars of it. It's in the Daphne family, which we all know Daphne can be difficult to grow, but the Edgeworthias do quite well for us.
Okay, so what happens? I mean, obviously it has beautiful green leaves, and I kind of like that it has that broad foliage and almost sort of rhododendron-like.
It is. That large leaf is really nice contrast in the shade garden. And I like the way when it rains, the water actually beads up on the foliage. But really it comes into its glory in late January, early February when it flowers. Now the flower buds actually form in the fall, and they hang on the plant all winter long and then begin to turn up just slightly in late winter and begin to bloom.
So it's one of those late winter flowering plants that gives us some interest in a time of year when there's not a whole lot else going on in our gardens.
Correct. It is fragrant as well. And then when the leaves fall off in the fall, you have the coarse texture. It's a coarse stem and kind of a little bit of red cast to it, so it's added interest during the winter as well.
Yeah, it's really, I really like it in my garden in the wintertime as much as I do in the summer, because it's got that stemmy sort of architectural appearance that just makes it really interesting.
Absolutely. And speaking of winter, it's a plant that kind of marginal if we have a real cold winter, if we get down to 0. So it's really best spring or early summer planted to get it well established.
While it's warm.
Absolutely, before we get a cold winter.
So plant it in the spring, keep it pretty well watered probably that first season, and then it should be well enough established that in a normal winter it would come through just fine.
Absolutely.
So not all shade is created equally. What do you take into consideration when you're finding locations for plants in the garden here?
Well, pretty much all plants, including shade plants, benefit from some sunlight. And it's really best to have morning sun because it's not as intense. So 3 or 4 hours of morning sun is ideal almost all shade plants, especially a blooming or flowering shade plant.
Right. But even plants like our hostas that we grow mostly for foliage, a lot of the ferns, even though some of them will grow in pretty deep shade, you're probably going to get more growth and some faster growth out of plants if they have just a little bit of sun during the day.
Absolutely. So here, this Annabelle Hydrangea, which is getting about 3 hours of morning sun, and you can see how it's budded up.
Sure.
So in dense shade, you would still have flowers, but not as many flowers.
Right. And one thing that I noticed, and you said this gets about 3 hours of morning sun. Now my Annabelles at my home garden are out in almost full sun. And I noticed that the flowers on this plant are a little bit smaller, but there are more of them.
Yes.
Whereas on my plants, the flowers are bigger, but not necessarily quite as many of them. So you get a little bit of a trade-off, but just as big a show.
Absolutely.
It just varies a little bit in the size of the flowers.
One thing to keep in mind with a plant that likes some shade, but you're giving it more sun, is it maybe require more water if it's in a sunnier location. But you also have to keep in mind if it's near tree roots, it's also going to require more water. So there's a lot that plays into placement of a plant.
Sure, and most of us who do garden in the shade are gardening amongst the tree roots. That's why we have a shade garden, is because there are big trees associated with it. Sometimes it might be the shade of a building, but you do have to take those tree roots into account, and how close to the tree you are may require more watering or less watering depending on that distance and how many roots you're planting through.
Absolutely, and the top of the tree, it's a lot harder to grow a plant under a river birch or a maple than it is an oak tree, because the maple and river birch have shallow roots, whereas the oak tree tends to go deep.
Deep roots, sure. Well, Jason promised you Delta Dawn, and here she is. This is a spectacular Heuchera.
It is, and you can see how it really brightens up a dark spot under this Ace of Hearts red bud and really brings your attention to the spot in the garden.
It does, and the leaves on this one are particularly large and really showy. And I noticed this one doesn't have as many blooms on it as some of them do. But is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, it all depends how you look at it, but yeah, this one doesn't have very many flowers, and the ones that are there are sort of a limey green that blend in with the foliage, but
Right.
look at the foliage. I mean, you're really growing it for that foliage, and some of those leaves are bigger than your hand, so really
Right.
adds a different
So
texture
this
to the
truly
landscape.
is, like many of our hostas, a foliage plant.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you, Jason, for letting us come down and visit today. I know I always enjoy coming down here and visiting at the UT Gardens. When can people come?
The gardens here are open daylight to dark year-round, and for you to come out and look and see what's doing well here and take that information back home and apply it to your landscape.
All right, and there's always something going on here, whether it's just the gardens for you to wander through or an event. And for a list of those events, you can visit our website, volunteergardener.org.
For inspiring garden tours, growing tips, and garden projects, visit our website at volunteergardener.org or on YouTube at the Volunteer Gardener channel, and like us on Facebook.